Heading into week 11 of the fantasy football season, I'm giving you my starts and sits at the wide receiver position. Do me a favor before we start. Why don't you let me know in the comments below your most difficult start sit decision of week 11. These are the crucial weeks, these next 3 weeks leading up to the playoffs, 3 or 4 weeks. You need the wins to get into those playoff spots. Friendly reminder, the Jaguars, Dolphins, Seahawks, and Bucks are all on bye weeks. That's a lot of fantasy relevant wide receivers. So I hope this video is going to help you out. I'm trying to focus on players who are on the edge, who you might not be sure if you can start. So here we go. My first start of the week is Tyler Boyd and also T. Higgins, because I know some people are a little up and down on T. Higgins at times as well. I think both of these guys are very, very good starts here in week 11. They go up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who currently give up the second most points to the fantasy wide receiver position. Now, this defense is completely different with J.J. Watt on the team. Without J.J. Watt, they weren't really able to put any pressure on the quarterback, and that completely changes now that he's back. You can see how it impacts the defense as a whole. But still, with Joe Burrow under center, this is a very competent quarterback who has been dealing with pressure his entire career. Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins are both going to be great plays. Tyler Boyd, since week 7, has had fantasy finishes of 29, 12.8, and 9.4. He's been getting at least 5 targets in all of those games. And T. Higgins, since week 7, has not scored under 13 fantasy points, averaging about 7 targets per game himself. So they are both great plays in what should be a pretty competitive game. These divisional games always get a little bit spicy, but I like T and Tyler Boyd. Obviously, you would prefer T. Higgins. All right, with my second start of the week, let's go to Chicago, or actually let's go to Atlanta, because that's where the game will be. Darnell Mooney at the Atlanta Falcons. Now, if you could dream up a ideal matchup for your wide receiver in fantasy, it would be the Atlanta Falcons. They currently give up the most points to the position, and we've seen a complete revival of the Chicago Bears offense centered around Justin Fields. Darnell Mooney will continue to be his #1 target. And since week 6, where we kind of started to see this revelation, this revival, if you will, of Justin Fields, Darnell Mooney is averaging 12.2 fantasy points, scoring his first touchdown as well in week 9. This is a fantastic matchup. Atlanta's probably going to be able to put up points against this terrible defense, so there should be plenty of points to go around. Darnell Mooney, I'm going to go ahead and say book it for a 12 to 15 point fantasy performance here again in week 11, if not a 20-point game, his first of the season. You can let me know if I'm wrong. That's fine. All right, my third start of the week is Joshua Palmer versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Palmer has been incredible with no Keenan Allen and no Mike Williams as far as his target share goes, if you will, okay? In week 9 versus Atlanta, he had 10 targets. He caught 8 of those for 106 yards. Last week versus San Francisco, a much more difficult defense. He had 8 targets, so he's still up there with the targets, but he only caught 3 of them for 44 yards. So his output was not as high. Now you go up against Kansas City, who has been roasted by wide receivers. I keep saying this to people as a Chiefs fan. Hey, Patrick Mahomes covers a lot of our sins. There's a lot of defensive problems with this team, and our secondary is getting roasted on a weekly basis. What did Christian Kirk do last week? Put up a 31-point game versus this Kansas City Chiefs defense. Now you got Josh Palmer, who I believe will continue to be the wide receiver 1 until Keenan Allen is back. The Chiefs give up the 5th most points to fantasy wide receivers. If he gets 8 targets, then he's going to be a top 24 wide receiver here in week 11 versus the Kansas City Chiefs. It's a Sunday night game. It's a divisional game. The Chiefs are going to be able to put up massive points on this terrible defense, and you're going to need Josh Palmer to do the same if the Chargers want even a chance at winning that game. All right, my fourth start of the week is Christian Watson versus the Titans. Yes, I know last week was really the only week you would have been comfortable, or happy rather, with his fantasy finish. He had 32.7 fantasy points. He had 4 receptions on 8 targets for 107 yards and 3 touchdowns. The Packers go up against the Tennessee Titans, who currently give up the 4th most points to the wide receiver position. And it's important to note that this breakout from Christian Watson shouldn't be a surprise. They have been trying to get him more and more involved into the game plan. The issue has been he's constantly been injured. Concussions, injuries in preseason. I mean, if you look at week 1, he played 66% of the snaps in week 1, which is very, very rare for a rookie wide receiver. And then after that, you see a bunch of injuries from pretty much week 2 until about week 7 or 8. So this is a player that they have been wanting desperately to get into the rotation, to get the ball to, and he's extremely necessary to this team as well. There's no Romeo Doubs, there's no Randall Cobb to compete with targets, and Allen Lazard, I think we know who Allen Lazard is by now. So Christian Watson, if he gets 8 targets a game, we could see truly a league winner in Green Bay. Now, do I expect him to get 8 targets a game? No, but I think he has a great chance at finding the end zone again versus a pretty banged up Tennessee secondary that's been roasted again like the Chiefs almost all year. They give up the 4th most points to the position. When you build that trust with Aaron Rodgers, when he's willing to continually go back to you, and when there's no one else available, you're going to have some sort of fantasy success. So Christian Watson, the good thing is early on in the game, he dropped a couple balls. Aaron Rodgers did not put him in timeout. They continually used him down the field. So I think you're going to continue to see Watson be a focal point of this offense moving forward. All right, my 5th start of the week, and hang in there with me, DJ Moore. If you were like me, I was very anti-DJ Moore before the season, and I think those people were right at this point. But I still think it's a good start this week versus the Baltimore Ravens, who currently give up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Last week in Atlanta, it was a weird game. And let's be honest, no team could really get anything going through the air because of the weather. The weather was pretty bad. It was raining, it was cold, windy. Now you go to Baltimore, and you better bet that Lamar Jackson and this offense is going to be able to put up massive points on this Carolina defense. So DJ Moore is going to be a much more necessary part to this offense. It might be Baker Mayfield. I know that's not necessarily ideal, but I think DJ Moore, if you're looking for someone who's on the edge and you've got people who are on bye and you see him on the bench and you're like, oh, should I really start him? You can start DJ Moore this week with some relative confidence. All right, my 6th start of the week. What I always like to do is try and give you guys some desperation starts. That's typically what I'm trying to do with these last couple starts. Guys that could potentially be on your waiver or you wouldn't consider starting them typically, but I like their matchup, and that is Michael Gallup at the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota currently gives up the 3rd most points to fantasy wide receivers. Gallup's been really up and down since he's been back. 3 targets game, 5, 7, 2, 6, 7. In the last couple weeks, though, last 2 games, he's had at least 6 targets. So he's getting the targets from Dak Prescott, and the offense is starting to open up. You see Dalton Schultz healthy, CeeDee Lamb has his game going, and now Michael Gallup can be that complementary piece to Dak Prescott. So I like Michael Gallup as a start this week. I think this is the week that we can really say that he bounces back and kind of gets back on the wagon, if you will. It's going to be a high-scoring game, most likely between some of the NFC's best offenses, I would say, just some of them. So go ahead and start Michael Gallup if you're in a desperation scenario. All right, I'm going to give you 3 sits of the week here. My first sit of the week is any Raiders wide receiver not named Davante Adams, right? Most of the time, people are looking for values or sneaky starts, and I think a lot of people would have resulted to Mac Hollins last week, who has had some good games. In week 2, he had 11 points. In week 3, he had 29. He's had a 12 and 13 point game in week 7 and 8. So I can see why people might do that, but this is not the matchup to chase. This Denver defense, even though they lost Chubb, is still very, very good. We saw that last week versus Tennessee, and they currently give up the 2nd fewest points to the wide receiver position. So even though Mac's going to be out there a lot, even though he's probably going to get quite a few targets, I don't trust him enough to start him. I think there are better starting options out there, like Michael Gallup. All right, my second sit of the week is any Jets wide receiver. This includes Garrett Wilson for me. I know some people out there are going to want to start Garrett Wilson. He's had a pretty good string of games. And if you don't have a better option, then go ahead and do that. But outside of Garrett Wilson, who I'm personally not starting, because this Patriots defense gives up the 5th fewest points to the position. It's Bill Belichick versus Zach Wilson. We have seen how this has gone before. For me, I'm not starting any Jets wide receivers. This is not the ideal matchup for you to chase, and especially not if you have Elijah Moore, who has dropped a goose egg in the past 3 games he's played. In my third sit of the week, this might be controversial, but if you don't have a better option, I understand you probably have to start him. It's what I said about Najee Harris last week. If you don't have a better option, you probably have to start him. But DIONTAE Johnson versus the Cincinnati Bengals, who currently give up the 7th fewest points to the wide receiver position. DIONTAE Johnson only had 5 targets last week, and he's been thriving on targets. After the bye week, have we seen a change in this offense? Is DIONTAE Johnson not going to get those 9, 10, 11, 12 target games anymore? I don't know the answer to that, but I know it's not a good matchup to chase. Kenny Pickett hasn't proven that he can support more than one fantasy wide receiver, and right now it looks like Pickens might be the guy there. If you look actually since week 4, there's only 1 game over 10 fantasy points. Actually 2, I'm sorry. Last week versus the Saints. I forgot to add that as well. So most of these have been 8 to 9 point games, and that's not something that I personally want to chase, especially now that we're unsure of the target share. Wide receiver 40 on the year. I know he's a big name, but I'm not starting him in this matchup. So why don't you comment down below? Let me know your favorite start of the week here. The guy that you have to sit even though you don't want to. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.
Yo, what's good? Thanks for watching. We got a lot more videos.
A lot more.
If you want more videos.
Watch it.
You can also subscribe.
Right now.
If you want to.
You need to.
And lastly, don't forget that you can sign up to support the show and get exclusive content by going to patreon.com/FantasyLand fam.